Welcome back, everyone. Is our fat dumbing us down? 3 years ago, a neuroscientist at MCG reported that mental decline in obese mice could be reversed with exercise or surgically removing belly fat. Now, Dr. Alexis Stranahan is looking at the impact location of body fat has on our brains and risk for dementia. Dr. Stranahan joins me now, and Dr. Stranahan, you say it is just not accurate to make a blanket statement that anyone who is obese or overweight is doomed for dementia.
That is absolutely correct. So when you look at the literature in humans, you see that type 2 diabetes is a very strong predictor of dementia. That's been shown in studies that compare diabetics and non-diabetics at the same age, and in studies that follow individuals with type 2 diabetes throughout their lives. However, when you look at the data on simple obesity in the absence of diabetes or other pathology, they're really quite mixed. I mean, there have been studies showing that a high BMI in your 70s and 80s is associated with reduced incidence of dementia. There have been studies showing that a high BMI in your middle age is associated with increased later life prevalence of dementia. So the literature are very mixed in when we look at just obesity in the absence of metabolic pathology. The few studies that have looked at body fat distribution and later incidence of cognitive decline in people have actually found a very strong predictive value for waist to hip ratio. Individuals who have the apple-shaped body fat distribution in midlife have a nearly twofold greater risk of developing dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or vascular dementia in later life, meaning into their 70s and 80s. So part of the reason I got interested in this is because I think that some of the variability in the literature in human patients is due to our use of BMI, which is just a weight-height ratio that doctors use to diagnose you with overweight or obesity according to national statistics.
Right. There's a chart they follow, and if you're at a gym, they do the same thing. They look at the scale and the chart.
But BMI doesn't tell you where you're carrying that fat. And there's a lot of literature in the metabolic, both in animal models and in human disease.
Right.
There's a lot of literature that demonstrates that visceral fat and the subcutaneous fat that accumulates around the hips and buttocks, those two types of fat have very different signaling patterns, and they have different effects on the immune system. So obesity is known to promote inflammation.
Yeah.
But when you look at where people are carrying that fat, it's visceral obesity that promotes a strong pro-inflammatory response, while individuals carrying a lot of fat in the subcutaneous area don't have that same level of pro-inflammatory markers in their blood.
So visceral is apple, and subcutaneous is the hip and the thigh.
It's largely hip and thigh. It can also be around the arms and up the back on the flanks, but mostly hip and thigh.
Okay.
So the subcutaneous fat is thought to be anti-inflammatory, and now I'm looking at whether a preferential energy storage in the subcutaneous area could in fact be protective and may account for why women and individuals with genetic predisposition to subcutaneous fat accumulation don't show the same risk of cognitive impairment with aging.
We've got to exercise and we've got to watch what we eat.
Of course, of course. But
there's no getting around it.
realistically, I recognize the fact that maybe you work 2 jobs, maybe a monthly gym fee is out of reach for you, or maybe you're running your kids around in the evenings and there's not as much time as you would like to cook healthy food. So it's not fair to say to the public that if you have a BMI beyond a certain threshold, you're going to get dementia. First of all, because it won't be true for everyone, and it'll drown out basically the valid science in the noise. I think we need to refine our criteria for how we predict risk of dementia, and if we can do that by looking at body fat distribution, perhaps in conjunction with certain blood markers, then that would be a much better way to reach targeted populations and say, hey, you especially should really consider making changes in your diet and your lifestyle. Otherwise, you may not be able to live independently into your 60s, 70s, and 80s. So the problem of obesity may never be solved. We need to make small changes in people's lives, and we need to refine our risk criteria so that we're not telling everybody with a BMI over 30, hey, you need to make these changes or the sky is going to fall.
Yeah.
Remember what happened to Chicken Little? You say
Yeah.
the sky is falling too many times, if it doesn't fall, you lose credibility.
Right.
So if we can use a combination of body fat distribution and blood markers to specify which individuals are at the greatest risk, then I think we can really dampen down some of that excess noise and reach the people that really need to be reached.
Well, I'm glad you're working on this. I'm glad that you're doing this here in Augusta. And we'll continue to follow your research. And it's a big problem, that's for sure, in our society. But thank you so much, Dr. Stranahan.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.